My dad deliberately excluded me from the family group, and at first, I thought it was just a small thing, until I found a way to turn the tables. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Clara, and I've always been the quiet one in my family. My dad, Raymond, and my older brother, Brett, never took me seriously. They ignored my ideas, dismissed my achievements, and always made me feel invisible. I tried to speak up at family gatherings, but it felt like I wasn't even there. One day, I heard them talking about the house they lived in, saying how much it meant to them and how they hoped it would stay in the family. That's when I had an idea. I started quietly saving money and researching ways to buy it without anyone knowing. My friend Margot helped me with the legal details, and after months of planning, I finally bought the house. At first, I kept it a secret. I made small changes, handled repairs, and watched them adjust without understanding who was behind it. Their confusion gave me a strange satisfaction. Then came the day I confronted my dad. I calmly told him how hurt I felt all these years, being dismissed and excluded. He was shocked. Brett couldn't believe it either. Finally, I revealed that I owned the house. Their surprise and guilt were clear. For the first time, they saw me as strong and capable. I didn't destroy them, I just made sure they respected me. Owning the house was more than revenge, it was my way of reclaiming my voice and proving I mattered. I used to visit my family almost every weekend, hoping to feel included, but no matter what I said, it was like I didn't exist. At dinner, my ideas were ignored, and my suggestions about small things, like what to cook or how to arrange the living room, were dismissed without a second thought. At one gathering, we were discussing plans for a summer trip. I suggested a few ideas for activities that I thought everyone would enjoy. My dad, Raymond, nodded politely but then completely ignored me and announced his own plan without asking for my input. It stung more than I expected. My brother, Brett, jumped in to support Dad, and the conversation moved on as if I had never spoken. It wasn't the first time something like this happened, but that moment hit me harder than usual. I began noticing a pattern: my opinions were rarely considered, and decisions that affected me, or even the whole family, were made without me. Even when I tried to participate in family discussions, my voice seemed invisible. I remember sitting there quietly, listening to them talk, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. The realization settled in slowly but firmly: I wasn't really a part of the family's decision-making. I was always the outsider, the one they included in name only. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't just about being ignored, it was about being undervalued and overlooked by the people who were supposed to care about me the most. That sense of betrayal, deep and quiet, started building inside me. I knew I had to find a way to change how they saw me, but I wasn't sure yet how. One afternoon, I was visiting my family when I overheard them talking about a house for sale in the neighborhood where I grew up. They were joking about how perfect it would be for them, laughing over the memories they had there. My heart sank at first, but then a strange thought crossed my mind. I realized that this could be more than just a passing conversation. It was an opportunity, a chance to prove myself and reclaim some control over the life they had always made me feel outside of. My mind started racing with ideas, each one building a quiet excitement inside me. I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't ignore. There was anger at how they had always overlooked me, dismissed my thoughts, and treated me as if I didn't belong. But alongside the anger was a growing sense of justice, a determination to show them that I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I could use this moment to subtly turn the tables. I didn't want to humiliate them, but I wanted them to finally see me as someone they could no longer ignore. My heart pounded as I imagined taking action, quietly but decisively, and watching the shift in their expressions when they realized I had made the move. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were alive with plans and possibilities. The idea of finally having a way to stand up for myself filled me with both fear and excitement. For the first time, I felt that I had a path to not just independence, but also to showing my family that I was not to be underestimated. After realizing the opportunity, I started looking into how I could actually buy the house without anyone knowing. I spent hours reading about property laws, mortgage options, and ways to keep ownership private. Every detail mattered, and I didn't want to make a single mistake. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I reached out to Margot, a friend I trusted completely. She had a sharp mind for money and legal matters, and I knew she could guide me safely through the process. We met over coffee and discussed every step carefully, from saving strategies to how to register the property without raising suspicion. Her advice was practical, clear, and gave me the confidence I needed. Quietly, I began arranging my finances. I moved money into accounts I controlled, researched loan options that wouldn't require my family's knowledge, and carefully tracked every dollar. Each day, I took small steps, making sure no one could notice. It felt thrilling and terrifying at the same time. I had to remain patient and alert. One wrong move, and the plan could collapse. I watched the neighborhood listings daily, studied the property's details, and double-checked the timing to make sure everything aligned perfectly. The process demanded focus, but it also gave me a sense of control I had never experienced with my family. Even though the plan was still in its early stages, I felt a surge of determination every time I imagined finally taking action. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to stay careful and persistent. For the first time, I felt like I was taking a step not just toward independence, but toward finally proving that I could make my own choices and shape my own future. After months of careful planning, the day finally came. I completed all the paperwork, transferred the funds, and officially became the owner of the house where my family had been living for years. Holding the final documents in my hands, I felt a wave of emotions I wasn't expecting. There was pride, a quiet, satisfying pride in knowing that I had done something they never thought I could. I had turned my frustration and feelings of being overlooked into action, and now I held tangible proof of my independence and determination. But along with that pride, there was a small twinge of guilt. The house wasn't just a building, it was their home, full of memories and comfort. Even as I felt the thrill of accomplishment, I couldn't ignore the thought that my actions would shock them deeply. I decided it was best to wait before revealing the truth. I didn't want anger or confrontation to ruin the moment. Instead, I chose to let them continue their lives, completely unaware of the change that had taken place. Each day, I imagined their confusion and surprise when they eventually realized that I was now in control. The suspense itself gave me a strange sense of satisfaction, a quiet power that was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. As I walked through the property, imagining how they might react, I felt a mix of triumph and tension. Every detail, from the front door to the small garden, reminded me that this was no longer just a dream. I had taken a bold step, and now the next chapter was waiting to unfold. The hardest part wasn't the purchase itself, it was the anticipation of the moment when they would finally understand what I had done. Once I owned the house, I began making small changes quietly. I arranged for repairs, updated the landscaping, and took care of bills without telling anyone. Nothing was dramatic, just subtle adjustments that slowly shifted the household. I wanted to see how they would respond without realizing I was behind it all. It didn't take long for the family to notice. Raymond and Brett started talking to each other, puzzled. "Did you notice the garden? It looks different," Brett said one morning. Raymond frowned. "I don't remember agreeing to any of this." Their confusion was satisfying in a quiet, steady way. I made small decisions about utilities, maintenance schedules, and even minor interior changes. Each adjustment was intentional, designed to let them see progress without knowing who was responsible. They discussed the changes constantly, trying to figure out who had made them. Their uncertainty was a small but powerful reminder that I now had influence where I had none before. Observing them became strangely rewarding. I felt a sense of authority as I realized how much they relied on the very actions I controlled. Each new alteration, from fixing a leaky faucet to organizing storage spaces, reinforced my confidence. The more they depended on the updates, the more empowered I felt. For the first time, I could witness the impact of my decisions without confrontation. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. I didn't need arguments or explanations to prove myself, the results spoke louder than words. Each day, I felt more in control, and with every small victory, I reminded myself that I had turned the tables in a way they would never anticipate. One evening, I decided it was time to speak up. I asked my dad, Raymond, to sit with me in the living room. My heart was steady, but my mind raced with everything I wanted to say. I could no longer let the years of being overlooked go unaddressed. I began calmly, explaining how I had felt invisible in the family for as long as I could remember. I told him about the times my opinions were ignored, the decisions made without asking me, and how often I had felt left out of their lives. My voice was steady, but I didn't hold back the hurt I had carried for years. Raymond froze. His face changed from confusion to disbelief, then defensiveness. "I didn't realize you felt that way," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. I continued, making sure he understood the depth of my feelings. "It's not just about one thing, Dad. It's every time I spoke and no one listened. I've always been on the outside, and it's been lonely." He tried to interrupt, but I held my ground. I needed him to hear it all, the betrayal, the pain, the quiet exclusion that had defined my childhood and adulthood. The room felt heavy as he realized the impact of his actions, and I saw genuine shock in his eyes. By the end of our conversation, Raymond was silent, no longer defensive but thoughtful. For the first time, I felt that my words had reached him. The acknowledgement of my experiences, of the way I had been treated, was the first step in reclaiming my voice. I left the room knowing I had spoken my truth, and that truth carried a power that years of invisibility could not erase. It wasn't long before Brett started noticing patterns he couldn't explain. Small changes around the house, decisions made without his knowledge, and improvements that didn't match his plans all pointed to someone taking control. When he finally realized I was behind it, his face turned red with anger. He stormed into the kitchen, raising his voice. "Clara, what is going on? Did you do all of this?" His tone was a mix of shock and frustration. I stayed calm, letting him vent while keeping my posture relaxed and my expression steady. I wasn't going to react with anger, that would only give him power over me. Brett paced, clearly struggling to process everything. "You can't just take over like this. This is our family home," he shouted. I listened quietly, letting him speak, then responded with measured words. "I didn't take over, Brett. I just made sure things were handled responsibly. You might not like it, but it was necessary." The room felt tense, every word hanging in the air. I could see the shock in his eyes slowly shift into begrudging respect, even if he didn't admit it. By staying composed, I maintained control of the situation. I wasn't trying to humiliate him, I was showing that I could act decisively where he and Dad had failed to include me. For a moment, the family dynamic froze. All the years of tension, frustration, and unspoken resentments bubbled to the surface. Brett's anger met my calm, and in that clash, the balance had shifted. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. Finally, the reality sank in for him. I was no longer someone to be ignored or dismissed, and that realization alone began to change how he viewed me entirely. Once Brett realized I was in charge, I decided to take things a step further. I began making decisions openly, handling everything from maintenance schedules to organizing the rooms. I planned each move carefully, ensuring it reflected both practicality and attention to detail. At first, the family resisted. Raymond and Brett kept arguing over minor issues, trying to assert control, but I calmly explained the best solutions. My suggestions were clear, efficient, and practical. Slowly, they realized they had underestimated my abilities all these years. Tasks they once thought trivial were handled smoothly under my direction, leaving them surprised and, in some cases, speechless. I enjoyed the subtle satisfaction of these small victories. Fixing a leaky faucet without being asked, reorganizing the garage for efficiency, and even scheduling the garden work became tiny reminders of how often my input had been ignored in the past. Every action silently told them that I was capable and that they had failed to recognize it. The more they struggled to adapt, the more empowered I felt. Their resistance faded into reluctant acceptance, and I could see the shift in their attitudes. Even small acknowledgments, like a nod from Brett or a quiet comment from Dad, felt like a confirmation that the balance had changed. It wasn't about revenge in a loud, dramatic way, it was about demonstrating that I could lead without permission, that I could make decisions they had always ignored me for. Each subtle act reminded them of the oversight they had committed for years. For the first time, they were adjusting to seeing me as someone equal, not the invisible daughter, but a person whose competence demanded respect. After seeing me take charge, I noticed subtle changes in the way Dad and Brett behaved. They started having quiet conversations on their own, pausing sometimes to think before speaking. I could sense that they were reflecting on the way they had treated me over the years. Raymond began spending more time alone in his study, and I overheard fragments of him admitting his mistakes under his breath. Brett, too, seemed quieter, less quick to dismiss ideas, and more hesitant to act without considering the consequences of ignoring me. Their expressions often carried a mix of guilt and realization, as though the past was finally catching up with them. I could see how uncomfortable it made them, facing the truth about their behavior. They had always assumed I would stay quiet, always be the one overlooked, but now they were forced to confront their biases and the countless times they had excluded me. Their discomfort was noticeable, but it also signaled growth and awareness, and that gave me a strange sense of relief. At the same time, I felt a mixture of emotions myself. There was satisfaction in knowing they were starting to understand my value and acknowledging the mistakes they had made. But alongside that was a quiet sadness, a recognition of the years lost, the moments I had been invisible, and the emotional toll it had taken on me. I realized that reclaiming my place in the family was not just about asserting control or proving a point. It was about holding space for respect, fairness, and acknowledgement. Watching them reflect, even in private, felt like a balance being restored, yet it reminded me that the journey had cost more than I had imagined. The day finally came when I decided to make everything clear. I called Dad and Brett into the living room and calmly told them, "I need you both to know something important. I own this house now." For a moment, the room went completely silent. Their eyes widened, mouths slightly open, unable to form words. The shock on their faces was unmistakable. They had assumed ownership would always remain in their hands, that I would never step up in such a decisive way. But now, they were confronted with the reality of my independence and authority. Dad rubbed his forehead, clearly overwhelmed. "Clara, how?" His voice trembled, filled with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Brett stared at me, silent at first, then anger and frustration quickly melted into hesitant acknowledgement. I explained briefly how I had planned everything, handled the finances, and made decisions quietly to ensure it went smoothly. I didn't boast, but my tone left no room for doubt. I had accomplished what they never imagined I could. Their reactions were a mix of regret and realization. Raymond took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, Clara. I should have included you all these years." Brett nodded slowly, adding, "I never meant to overlook you. You've shown us we were wrong." Hearing their apologies stirred a strange combination of emotions in me. Relief and vindication mingled with the lingering weight of years spent being undervalued. In that moment, they finally understood my strength, my independence, and the consequences of their past neglect. The balance had shifted completely, and for the first time I felt truly seen and respected by the family that had once treated me as invisible. After revealing everything, I knew it was time to set boundaries. I calmly explained what I was willing to accept and what I would no longer tolerate. I was firm but not harsh, making it clear that respect and fairness were now essential in our relationship. It was important to me that I didn't completely alienate them. I wanted them to understand that my actions were not meant to punish, but to establish balance. By asserting myself clearly and consistently, I could create a household environment where my voice mattered without causing permanent damage to our family ties. Over the next weeks, the atmosphere in the house began to change. Dad and Brett started consulting me on decisions, listening more carefully, and acknowledging my contributions. Their tone became warmer, and their actions reflected genuine recognition of my independence. I felt a quiet satisfaction in watching them adjust, knowing the respect I had longed for was finally being given. The sense of control I had gained was empowering, but I was careful not to overstep. Every choice I made reinforced my authority while allowing room for collaboration. I could see that my family had learned to appreciate my presence, and I realized that maintaining this balance required both strength and compassion. By the time things settled, I felt a mix of relief and accomplishment. I had achieved what I wanted: recognition, respect, and independence, all without severing connections with the people I cared about. The house symbolized more than ownership, it represented my growth and the justice I had quietly claimed. For the first time, I could interact with my family knowing that I had reclaimed my place, firmly and fairly. Sitting quietly in the living room after everything had settled, I couldn't help but think about the journey I had been through. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and made to feel unimportant had shaped me in ways I hadn't realized. The betrayal I felt from my family's constant exclusion had been painful, but it also forced me to discover resilience and determination I never knew I had. Revenge, in its quietest form, had given me more than satisfaction, it had given me clarity. I didn't need to humiliate anyone or create lasting conflict to prove my worth. By taking control of what mattered to me and asserting myself, I had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of my own abilities. Every careful step, every subtle move, taught me lessons about patience, strategy, and self-respect. As I reflected, I understood that the most important growth came from within. I had learned to value myself, set boundaries, and demand the respect I deserved. It wasn't about punishing my family, it was about reclaiming my life, my voice, and my independence. The experience left me wiser, more composed, and fully aware of my own strength. Sometimes, being invisible teaches you the strength to reclaim your life. I hope my story reminds you to recognize your own worth, to stand firm in your decisions, and to protect your boundaries, even when those closest to you fail to see your value. Life is too short to remain in the shadows, and sometimes the quietest victories are the most powerful. Take a moment to reflect on your relationships and ask yourself if you are being heard and respected. Don't settle for less than you deserve, because the strength to change your life is always within reach. Do you think I handled my family the right way, or should I have stayed quiet and given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.